Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Welcome back for those of you who have been a part of Creative Power Civic Purpose series. Welcome for first-time folks who are coming to this for the first time. My name's Teresa Sweetland. I'm the Executive Director of Forecast Public Art. I'm really glad to have you here for today's conversation. This is the third event in our Creative Power Civic Purpose series. And today's session is called Deep Roots of Belonging. Lessons from Rural and Southern Cultural Leadership. Next slide, please. I want to start out with a big thank you today to the Educational Foundation of America, or EFA for short, for those of you who know them, for supporting this series, helping make this learning space possible. And today we're focused on hearing from rural and Southern cultural leaders based in Central Appalachia and the Alabama Black Belt, two overwhelmingly rural regions of the country and the primary geographic focus area of EFA's arts program. So thank you to EFA. Next slide. As usual, Mallory, Roxana, Nazam, and I are your hosts for today. I am based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Mallory is based in Atlanta, Georgia. We're excited to lead you through this conversation today with some incredible panelists. Next slide. And for those of you who are new to Forecast, we are a Minnesota-based nonprofit that works locally, regionally, and nationally. And our mission is to activate, inspire, and advocate for public art that advances justice, health, and human dignity. You can find out more on our website as well. I'm going to just quick talk through how we're going to spend our next 90 minutes together today. We're going to start with some grounding in this series very briefly. Then we're going to talk about civic health data in the South and Appalachia, followed by some context about why this topic is so urgent right now, especially as we're seeing new and aggressive threats to democracy and voting rights in the region. Then we're going to hear from three incredible creative leaders who share a bit more about their work. And we're going to have a panel discussion, and then you'll have a chance to ask questions as well. So get ready for those questions that'll go in the chat. Next slide, please. So why did we start this series? We really wanted to start a series to ask this urgent question. What does it look like when artists and arts groups are seen as critical civic actors and collaborators, helping communities imagine, build, defend, and sustain a healthier democracy? And we really think about what's possible when the arts field and the democracy fields actually work together towards collective power. And we've curated 6 dynamic learning sessions that have been taking place. We've had the first 3, if you joined us for those. The final 3 sessions will be coming up, focusing on neighboring and trust building. We'll be talking about artist-government collaborations for more responsive institutions, as well as funding. So that last session, hopefully we have some interesting funding, collaborations, and information to share. And as a quick note, the recordings from the first 2 sessions are available on our YouTube page if you want to check those out. This first was Arts and Culture as Vital Civic Infrastructure, and the second was Knowledge is Power, Demystifying Civic Systems Through Creative Practice. And so with all of that background, today we're building on of that, but we're shifting our lens very specifically to belonging to a specific place and region today. And this series has taken us mostly from topics and conversations around major cities in the country to learn from artists strengthening democracy. But we knew from the start that we couldn't do this work without centering the South and Appalachia regions where the fight for democratic participation has been the longest, where the stakes are the highest, and when artists and culture bearers are doing some of the most essential civic work in the country. And I'm going to go into some civic health data from the region, and I just want to name up front, I'm not from the South or Appalachia. Our organization does work in rural Midwest pretty extensively. So we work in rural communities. And while we asked a number of very busy people to do kind of this context setting, they couldn't be here with us today, but we did get some great advice. So my hope is that I can honor this work today and this intro. And that said, I will say I come from a long line of dairy farming and coal mining folks from rural Southern Illinois. Much of my family still lives there today, so the stories of rural life are close and near and dear to my own family. Um, I'll do my best to honor what I've learned from my family as well. So, Mallory, do you want to jump in with a chat question to see who's here today? And we would love to know where you're coming from, where, if any of you are from the region as well. Mallory.
Yes, hello. We wanted to get a sense of where everyone is coming from today. So if you wouldn't mind just typing into the chat, where are you tuning in from? It'll give us a sense of, yeah, just the landscape of who's here today. Hello, Atlanta. I am also in Atlanta. We've got folks from the Twin Cities. We got folks in the West, Philly, rural Maine, Grand Rapids, Steelville, Missouri. A couple of folks from the DMV, Moab, Utah, deserts of California. Wonderful. So I'm seeing there are definitely some folks living in more rural communities. We love to see that here. And some folks tuning in from the South, Appalachia. We've got some Johnson City, Tennessee. We've got Tallahassee. We have Atlanta. Got a few Atlanta folks. Beautiful. This is great to see.
Great. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. I'm going to jump in and talk about, thank you, Mallory. I'm going to jump in and talk about this region that we're rooting ourselves in today. Um, some of the most innovative and deeply relational civic and cultural work in the country is happening in the South and Appalachia, and that is not new by any means. These regions have been generating creative leadership, democratic practice and movements that changed this country for generations. The civil rights movement was forged in the Black Belt of Alabama. The labor movements were born in the coal fields of Appalachia. Bluegrass, gospel, blues, country music all trace their roots to these regions. And today, a new generation of artists and culture bearers is continuing that tradition, building on deep legacies of organizing, storytelling, mutual aid, creativity, and showing up for one another. And these are places with extraordinary social capital, neighbors who know each other, communities take care of each other, traditions of faith, food, music, and craft that hold people together across hard times. And that trust between people is one of the most powerful civic assets in our country, and it's the foundation for everything we're going to hear about today is built on. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we've been doing in all of our sessions is being real about the civic health challenges that we're facing. And we don't want to overlook the context that these communities are working in. The challenges are real. They're rooted in specific histories of extraction, exclusion, and sustained economic and racial discrimination. In Appalachia, poverty exceeds 14%. Nearly 200 rural hospitals have closed since 2005, and the mortality rate is significantly higher than the national average. And in Alabama's Black Belt, poverty runs 2 to 3 times the state's average, and some counties have virtually no broadband access as recently as 2020. And if you think of these facts, they are actually all civic health problems. When you're working 2 jobs to stay afloat, you don't have time to go to the town hall. When your hospital closes, you lose more than healthcare. You lose one of the last places in town where people gathered and where jobs existed and where you could see your community functioning. And when you don't have broadband, you can't access voter information, find out what your representatives are doing, and can't participate in the civic life that's increasingly happening online. And there's the information gap as well. According to Medill School of Journalism, 40% of all local newspapers in the US have vanished since 2005. 80% of news deserts are actually in rural counties. So when your local newspaper closes, there's no one covering, right, your school board. There's no one asking questions of your city council or holding elected officials accountable. So These basics of survival and the basics information and the basics of democracy are not separate. They're actually all the same fight. And the next generation feels this very acutely when we talk about youth coming up in these regions. Research from Tufts University found that two-thirds of rural youth live in civic deserts, twice the rate of urban areas, and that of non-white rural youth are among the hardest hit. And researchers have found that lower political participation by young people is not a reflection of apathy. They're often, quote, exhausted from navigating systemic barriers with very little institutional support after facing compounding set of hurdles, including poor school districts, lack of broadband, and isolation. And just last week, Brown University released their 2026 Civic Information Index, and it confirms this across all generations in Appalachia and the Black South, where more than 40% of registered voters didn't vote in the last presidential election. They registered, but they did not show up. And when it comes to investment, rural America receives just 7% of philanthropic dollars, despite making up 14 to 20% of the total population. And I just include this quote here from Elizabeth Tom at Harvard School of Arts and Sciences that people in these regions experience kind of a double whammy: income losses from declining industries and hard time accessing support from social programs, which leaves them feeling forgotten about, abandoned by both industry and government, and ultimately those experiences lead to disengagement and low levels of political efficacy. What I want to note is and emphasize is these communities are not also defined by these numbers. They are defined by their incredible response. And the response is extraordinary that you're going to be hearing about today. And there's so much that I know I'm excited to learn from them and learn more. And I don't think we can talk about this region without talking about the direct threat to democracy happening imminently. The urgency of this moment makes this effort to strengthen and defend democracy so important, not for this region, but for the whole country. When on April 29th, the Supreme Court issued its decision in Louisiana versus Calais, and the ruling gutted the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, one of the most sacred civil rights protections in this country. It permits states to use partisan gerrymandering as an excuse to deny Black voters a voice in their own government. And I think we know the Voting Rights Act was born from the bloodshed on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the courage of those who marched in Selma for the right to vote. Following this decision, we've seen Alabama move to redraw its congressional districts and Tennessee following. And the power of Black and minority voters in those states is being stripped away in real time. And this week, the New York Times wrote that America is witnessing the greatest decimation of Black political power in over a century. So we need to pay attention within this region and without. Everyone should be paying attention and taking action. And also, we want to really focus today on what's giving us hope and the response that's already underway, the incredible civil rights organizations mobiling across the South, arts and culture bearers on the ground creating spaces where civic engagement and memory and belonging come together every single day. Next slide, please. And so, why are we talking about artists in the context of this generational threat to democracy? Because the struggle for democracy is fundamentally a struggle about belonging. Who feels seen, who feels welcomed into public life, and whose futures are valued. And the health of our democracy is contingent on the health of our social fabric. And many of the skills democracy requires, like listening and collaboration and problem solving, and especially imagining something better, are practiced culturally long before they are ever practiced politically. And that's what artists have always done. And in rural Southern communities, especially, civic participation has always been broader than elections. It includes mutual aid and shared labor and caregiving and everyday acts of showing up for your neighbors. And the same networks that help people survive are foundational for transformational civic and democratic work. So when artists create the conditions where people feel like they belong, people participate. They show up for each other and they show up at the ballot box and they show up for their own futures. And I want to bring increasingly attention to the organizations and the spaces in communities where this work is being recognized. Next slide, please. These are the places that the Ford Foundation's Trust for Civic Life called civic hubs, locally based, locally led spaces where people gather, build relationships, and act together towards meaningful change. And our panelists today are artists, incredible artists, working inside these kinds of civic hubs. And you're about to hear what that looks like on the ground in community today. So I'd like to welcome our extraordinary panelists, please. Please welcome Erin Michelle Washington, Carey Fountain, and Sassa Wilkes. I'm going to introduce each of them one at a time and share their work. And after everyone speaks, we're going to have a discussion and a panel. And again, you'll have a chance to ask questions. So we are going to start with Erin Michelle Washington. I'm going to share their bio. So our first panelist, Erin Michelle Washington, is a creative producer, civic designer, and ecosystem builder working at the intersection of arts, land stewardship, and community development in the American South. They're the founder of SoulCenter and co-founder of Clark Street Fund, Fresh Greens Market, and HBCUX, initiatives that together form a Southern regenerative ecosystem, advancing cultural infrastructure, community wealth, food systems, and creative entrepreneurship in Montgomery, Alabama, and beyond. Washington is committed to imagining and designing a future where queer, trans, JNC youth are well. Please welcome Erin. Thank you, Erin. Can't wait to hear from you.
Blessings, Theresa. Thank you so much to you, to Mallory. Thank you so much for having us here. Carey and Sassa, all of my love, all of the folks in the place. You made it to today. Today is the day. Thank you so much for being here. As we know, the South got something to say. And so I'm very grateful to be here today. In the midst of everything that's happening in this world, also just, offering love and light to folks here in this country, to folks in other countries that are experiencing a great turmoil and strife at this time. Ashe to everyone. Blessings, fam. My name is Erin Michelle Washington. And before I start, I want to give an honor to a genius artist and cultural worker that I love, Faith Ringgold. This piece that's featured here is her piece, The United States of Attica. Please check that out. Look it up. It's very important, Faith Ringgold. So I'm Erin Michelle Washington. I am a creative waymaker, a third generation HBCU graduate. Any of my HBCU fam in the room, holla, put it in the chat. I graduated from FAMU. I'm also a third generation HBCU professor. I used to be a professor of theater at Spelman College. Ashe to Spelman, scholar and an organizer. When kind of bringing myself into space, I also bring my ancestors into space. And one ancestor I want to bring into space today is genius artist and cultural worker Toni Cade Bambara. One quote that I take from Toni Cade that she said deeply inspires my work, which I wanted to start to share. She says, "A people entrenched in another people's fiction is an endangered people. A people entrenched in another people's fiction is an endangered people." And so for me, at the base of my work, I, in community with many folks here in Georgia and Alabama, have been making and remaking the worlds that we desire to live and love inside of. We've been making new narratives. We've been crafting the true space of the South. The South is hella queer, is hella indigenous, it's trans, it's present, and just grateful to be in this space. So I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. All the Alabama folks, shout out from the land of the Muskogee and the Cherokee. I come from a people that make ways out of no ways. I come from a people that built their own towns and grew their own food in their communities. I come from a people that crafted Black radical space in the midst of utter terror. A folk that decided to stay and root in this red clay dirt, even in the midst of horror. Alabama is a queer space. Alabama is the seed of Black political thought. Our collective work here in Montgomery in particular sits in the center of this making and remaking. So for me, in the last 7 years, 7 years ago, I moved from San Francisco, California, working in a job that I was hating. And I moved back to the South, and the South just wrapped its arms around me. And I've been between Montgomery, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, crafting an ecosystem with a group of genius folk here in the South, across 4 organizations that I either founded or co-founded. One shout out is SoulCenter. SoulCenter is a creative studio space, particularly geared toward queer and trans makers here in the South, 18 to 35. HBCUX is a digital platform space connecting artists and makers from HBCUs to one another and to also resources. Clark Street Fund is a community-led fund, literally resourcing the west side of Montgomery. And Fresh Greens Market, which I'm going to show a clip about, is a group of small urban farms and a free market space on the west side of Montgomery that myself and my sister, genius farmer and leader Erica Washington, created. For me, in our work, we are interested in telling a new story about Alabama, one that speaks to the abundance, the innovation, and the generous spirit that is present in this red clay dirt. I, always honor my indigenous ancestors, our African ancestors, our queer and trans ancestors, and folks that have been working toward the liberation and freedom of Black, brown, and indigenous communities in Alabama. Before I show a clip of Fresh Greens, I want to shout out my brother Carey, in Birmingham, doing work in Birmingham and Selma. Birmingham and Montgomery have been organizing with one another for many years. And so just grateful for your leadership in space and the work that you're doing. So I'm actually going to share a minute clip of a documentary that's being created around the work that we're doing here in Montgomery at Fresh Greens Market, created by a genius Black queer filmmaker, Sid Foster. Give me a second to set this up. All right. Beloved Mose, our great grandfather was a sweet potato farmer in Snowden, Alabama. And then they were growing sweet potatoes in their backyard when they just had their house. And then when they created the store, that was one of the first things that we went to the store, was a sweet potato. So this whole concept that somebody has to have this amount of acreage of land, that this, not like you can use what you have, right? And as our elder Georgette Norman says, the very things that Black and brown folks have been doing for many generations, when we start to make that thing inaccessible, is a very difficult time. So Black folks, our family, we've been farming for over 4 or 5 generations. Our father's side, farmers, our mother's side, farmers. So now Erica and I are joining the fold. The full circle to going to college to be a pharmacist to now being a farmer is life changing, especially like working in a business where we're producing herbs and where for myself, I literally healed myself through herbs that were grown naturally, locally has been a game changer. I think that we as Black people, as people in general, we have to get back to the land. The land is so healing in more ways than one. It's also like a structural thing of being able to know where your food is grown. If you're not growing food, get in community and find a local farmer. Or maybe you and your neighbors decide which one thing you each want to grow so you can share in the event that a system shuts down. In the midst of creating a grocery store, we've created affordable housing. We've basically created a neighborhood watch association. We have been growing food. Like, it's so much community care, resource sharing that's happened on the road to grocery store, but we have been working very diligently on self-care to be able to craft something new, right? We want to keep our hands in the dirt. We want to keep doing our yoga poses. We want to keep connecting with friends. We want to keep finding that balance so that the work is easy and light, and that the actual work is like our inner work. With my children, like
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. Lots of show Erin some love, use the reactions,
thank you
share
so
the
much. I
chat.
was trying to come off the mute. Look, all of the blessings, love, and light. And I see that fam you in the chat. Come on, fam. What other HBCUs are present? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. We are gonna introduce our next speaker, and you're gonna hear more from Erin and everyone else when we move into our discussion shortly here. So Carey Fountain is our next panelist. Carey is a multidisciplinary artist, musician, cultural strategist based in Alabama. And Carey is known for transforming conversations into interactive art, is the founder of Vibes and Virtues. Carey merges music, visual art, community engagement to inspire dialogue and social change. Carey's work, from his self-produced music projects to civic art initiatives, they all challenge norms and they uplift new perspectives. Currently, he's the director of programs and partnerships at Selma's Foot Soldiers Park, pretty well known. Maybe you have heard of it. And there he's designing creative programs that honor history and empower communities. So whether it's through soulful music performances, thought-provoking card games, I checked out your card games, Carey, they're very cool, or public art installations, we know that Carey is always striving to leave the world more positive and connected through art. Welcome, Carey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Um, let's see. I'm trying to share my screen. I don't know can you all see my screen?
We can see a headshot of a woman.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, perfect. So, thank you all again. Thanks to Forecast team for making this possible. I really am just excited for this moment and to talk a little bit about the work that we do at Foot Soldiers Park. So before I begin, I just wanted to first acknowledge and honor Ms. Joanne Bland, who is the co-founder of Foot Soldiers Park. Lifelong civil rights activist, child foot soldier, and one of Selma's greatest cultural and civic leaders. Ms. Bland dedicated her life to making sure that the stories of ordinary people who shaped the civil rights movement would never be forgotten, and her vision continues to shape the work that we do today at Foot Soldiers Park. So it's truly an honor to continue that work alongside the team here in Selma. And as Mallory mentioned, my name is Carey, and I am an artist, cultural strategist, and I serve as the director of programs at Foot Soldiers Park. Um, a lot of the work that I do sits at the intersection of art, participation, memory, and civic life. One thing that, when I was asked about being a part of this panel, one thing that's really kind of been on my heart is the idea that art is often treated like an extra, like it's something decorative or optional. But in communities like Selma, art functions very differently. Art helps communities process history. It creates public dialogue. It builds belonging. It creates spaces where people gather, reflect, and participate together. So for me, art is not an amenity. It is part of civic infrastructure. And it is also a tool that can gauge and shape civic health. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that through these next few slides. So when people think about Selma, they often think about the past, whether it's Bloody Sunday, the voting rights movement, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But for the people who live there, Selma is not just history, it's an active civic landscape. The city still carries the weight of institutional disinvestment, poverty, generational trauma. It carries deep, deep democratic memory. And at Foot Soldiers Park, we try to use that history not simply as preservation, but as a tool for participation, for building trust, and also belonging. Because when we think about democracy, I think it's important to realize it's not just about policy, it's also about whether communities feel connected to one another and connected to the places that they live. So one of the ways that we approach that is through creative placemaking. So here you see some snapshots, kind of a collage of photos from our Selma Cinema Festival and also our Photographic Nights of Selma event. So this brings artists, storytellers, filmmakers, students, and residents together through shared cultural experiences. This past year, the Cinema Festival included films from 7 countries, while also inviting local students to create films about voting rights and Selma's history by interviewing elders in their own community. And I think that those simple types of exchanges, when it's a young person sitting down with a camera with someone who lived specifically, like in this case, through the movement, that's more than just storytelling. That becomes a civic act. And these programs create opportunities for dialogue across generations and across differences. And in places like Selma, that matters deeply. So I wanted to just share a little bit about the Black Cherry Tree Project. This is an art initiative outside of my work at FSP that began just with the idea of using public art, storytelling, and memorial markers and tree planting to preserve stories connected to lynchings. And what really interests me about like this project and what I really wanted to highlight it for is that remembrance becomes participatory. Artists, they're contributing artworks to honor victims, and there's community gatherings to host conversations and to talk about those victims and why they're commemorated. And then there's also permanent physical space that's created, so the story lives forever, and that person's tragic story doesn't become forgotten. Um, and that's how it transforms memory from something passive into something that communities we can actively shape together. And I think it's important because civic culture is not built through information alone. It's built through shared experience and collective ownership. This also highlights some of my work with a project called Wildcard, which is a participatory art experience. And this is, again, a participatory experience where audiences shape the art through reflection, conversation, collaboration, and interaction. They answer prompts tied to social themes, they exchange ideas, they earn tokens, and the goal is to make it feel fun, but get into these deep topics. Um, and I think one of the most important parts of that is how are those responses archived, and those perspectives, reflections, they are all a part of a like publicly accessible growing archive. So they're all stored so people can look back and see how people thought about particular social issues. So I wanted to include this slide because I think it's important to note that the work between my creative work and also with Foot Soldiers Park, they're all deeply connected philosophically. Before leading programs in Selma, I was exploring how art could create dialogue, participation, memory, and belonging. And that same philosophy now shapes how we approach civic programming at Foot Soldiers Park. The My creative practice taught me that participation is not something that communities can just simply consume. It's something that they build together. And I think it influences how I think about public programming, youth engagement, preservation, storytelling, and community gathering. So when I think about civic infrastructure, and I think a lot of times there's ideas about roads or buildings or institutions, but culture is infrastructure. So creating programs around storytelling, youth engagement, economic empowerment, whole self-health, these all contribute to how communities can understand themselves and also relate to one another. In Selma, art is not operating outside of civic life. It's helping communities process memory, create opportunity, to build relationships, and also sustain participation. And I think artists have an important role to play in helping communities imagine futures that institutions alone cannot. So the core idea I just want to leave with is that democracy is not only something that happens at the ballot box, it's something that we practice together. Culture is democratic infrastructure. Um, and it takes memory, it takes participation, it takes belonging, it takes dialogue, it takes shared cultural experience. In this picture, these pictures here, this was a mural created through Foot Soldiers Park's Youth Leaders Program, where I led an art activist workshop, and the students were guided through conversations about public art, civic storytelling, and how murals can shape how communities imagine themselves. And I created different sketches for them to choose from. And this was the one that they decided on. And what stood out to me was that the students wanted the mural to reimagine the future of Selma, and they wanted to rename the bridge as part of that vision. So, while we went through this process and while I may have taught them the technical skills behind mural making, the vision came from them, and it was created collaboratively with them as well. And then it continues to live permanently in Ward 8 in Selma. And for me, that's just an example of a project that represents what this work can look like at its best when young people are not just learning history, but also shaping public space, a civic identity, and the future story in their community. So this is what I mean when I say that art can function as democratic infrastructure. So, yeah.
Thank you, Carey. Let's show Carey some love in the chat using reaction. I love that quote. I think it hit a lot of folks that culture is infrastructure and essential to our democracy. I think that's a good tagline for our whole series and definitely our conversation today. I am gonna invite our last speaker, but not the least, Sassa Wilkes. Our final panelist, Sassa, has served as director of Recreate Appalachia, a creative placemaking program of Coalfield development since 2025. A West Virginia native artist, he is driven by a passion for teaching, learning, and collaborating with other artists and with community members. In his role at Coalfield Development, Sassa leads efforts to bring the organization's revitalized spaces to life through art, culture, music, creative expression. His work invites community members to share in both the vision and the implementation of public art projects that renew and re-energize place, all while uplifting and supporting Appalachian artists and makers. And we're going to hear all about that today. Sassa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me. I'm really excited to share with you all. I've been furiously writing notes about the things that the other speakers said because so much of it resonated with me and the work that I do with Recreate here. Like Mallory said, I'm based in Huntington, West Virginia, with a program called Recreate Appalachia. It's a creative placemaking program of a larger nonprofit called Coalfield Development. I'm also coming at this conversation specifically, especially as an artist. I worked as a working artist for the past 8 years or so before doing this work with Recreate Appalachia. So I'm definitely wearing both hats with a lot of the stuff that we do here. Is it in a really tangible way with the project that I'm going to share with you. I want to echo what Carey was saying about art being a tool for civic health, and what I'm going to share with you is a project that is a really good example of art being used as a tool for civic health, that I'm kind of serving as both the director of the program that's presenting this to the public and the designing artist that's behind it, in addition to working with other artists as well. So I'm going to share some slides with you. Okay, can you all see my screen here?
Yeah.
Not sure which version of this you're seeing, actually. So this project is called Solidarity. This is a polytab mural project that we've been doing. Recreate Appalachia is based out of West Edge Factory, which is a formerly abandoned factory that we're turning into a civic hub, like you all were talking about. This is it was going to be a year-long project. It's actually becoming something a little bit longer than that even. And we're doing a permanent large-scale mural, but we're using polytab fabric to make it accessible for everyone to be able to share in this. So it's created off-site. If you haven't used that before, it's painted off-site. You can piece it together kind of like a collage, and then it's adhered onto the building. So it creates the opportunity for a lot of people to be able to work on it when maybe it wouldn't be accessible to them otherwise. This project is entirely community painted. So the sections of it I designed and did digital mock-ups of it, but they're being repainted and reimagined by community in a way that everybody can come back and see the exact pieces that they created. Did that move the slide for you all?
It did not.
Okay. Did, did it move
That
there?
did. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know which screen was sharing actually. So this mural is based on a history that we need to reclaim as Appalachians, and specifically West Virginians. It's a mural that centers the history and legacy of the West Virginia Mine Wars. So the West Virginia Mine Wars were the largest armed insurrection in U.S. history outside the Civil War. I went to school in West Virginia and was not taught about this. The education of this was actively suppressed. So chances are you might not have been taught about it either. But it is a huge piece of US history that is largely missing from my education and from the education of all West Virginians as well. It will feature 12 portraits of key figures of the West Virginia mine wars. Each portrait is made up of 108 individual squares, and I'm a portrait artist among other mediums I like to use, and I think portraiture is particularly powerful way to tell this story because you can look into the person's eyes for one thing, but also even artists say that portraiture is difficult, that that's something they don't know if they can tackle a lot of the time. I hear that from a lot of people. So putting the recreation of this work into the hands of community members who don't necessarily consider themselves to be artists, and then having them back up and be like, wow, we made that together, and this is an accurate representation of this person. And then also look into the eyes of these ancestors while they learn the history of this person, I think is a really powerful way to sort of remember who we are. So these are the first three that we had created. This is an example of how it's created. So the left-hand side is a digital version. So that's the painting that I made. And it uses the red background because this is the red bandana that the miners wore to show that they were unionized miners in the fight. And so that's common theme throughout all of these. And the right side is when the other people painted it. I personally think it's way more interesting looking when other people paint it. I've created it in a way that makes it pretty accessible for people to be chopped up and recreated. So I've simplified the values and make it, a little bit easier than a photograph to look at for people. And it's kind of spot on every time. I have to do very little to it afterwards. Mother Jones also is the reason I picked her for this is because a lot of people still think that that's just a magazine. She was an actual person. She was one of the most influential figures in American labor history. She was called the most dangerous woman in America by a West Virginia district attorney because of her ability to organize and inspire workers to strike. Part of what is making this really successful is that it's really super consistent. People know where they can come to work on it. They know when they can come to work on it. We have a first Saturday series of events at West Edge Factory every single month where we have a brand new art show in the gallery. We have 40 some artists pop up as vendors. We have a local food hub creating an amazing menu so people can buy for lunch, so people can come and shop and listen to live music. A lot of local schools come and sing, like little choirs and things. They can shop from local artists and they can pop up at this table and help contribute to the next portrait in the series. So that consistency and creating that place where people can come together and hang out once a month and not have to spend money if they don't want to. We try to have enough stuff for free there that people can just come and hang out and just paint. Has really, really been cool. We've definitely seen people come back and back again with more family members because they're like, look at my square. They take a picture of their square. They're really proud of what they did. We've also been going to the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum to do tours with schools local to that area so they can contribute. Um, as well as elementary schools. We have some sections that are not portrait based. So this is the most recent elementary school visit that we did, where we just give them a prompt. Sometimes it's just, what are the best parts of West Virginia to you, or what do you picture when you hope for a better West Virginia? And people can create patterns, abstract pieces. Essentially, they're creating a fabric for this. I'm working with a quilt artist named Amy Pabst, who will be cutting these sections up and reconfiguring them into basically into a quilt that goes in between these pieces with a definite focus on the red bandana. Um, Something I didn't say when I was missing my notes because I didn't know which screen I was on. That red bandana, going along with that suppressed history, the history of the Mine Wars was not only suppressed, it was definitely retold by other people who wanted us to believe something very different about ourselves than what it really meant. So West Virginia unionized miners wearing those red bandanas around their necks in battle signified they were part of a union. So redneck is in West Virginia, that's where that came from. Redneck used to mean multiracial army of unionized workers standing shoulder to shoulder to defeat corporate greed, which sounds so much better than what you think of when you hear the word redneck. So reclaiming that term as a West Virginian feels particularly powerful right now, and being able to tell these kids that that's where that term came from, it just to see them understand. I mean, I just learned it not terribly long ago, which is really shameful, I think. But it's to be able to teach that to children now and see them kind of digest that and reclaim it and be like, that is not a bad word. That word is pretty awesome. Like, that's amazing. So that's been really, really cool. So I've been doing a lot of stuff with kids to make sure they can contribute. We also had kind of a kickoff. We had already started it, but we wanted people to really understand this on May Day, which is kind of like the original Labor Day. We had an event called a Redneck Reclamation where people came together. We had a talk by the executive director of the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum to give people a history of this. And at that point, everyone really had started loving it so much and it was going so well that we decided to make it a bigger project and stretch it out until May Day next year. So May Day 2027 will hopefully be the date that we're unveiling this mural. We've applied for a grant to make that kind of a bigger celebration and have a miners dinner and lots more education about this project. So hopefully next year in 2027. Well, we'll be doing it. We'll see how big it is and how much money we get for it, but we're doing it either way. The mural's happening and we're doing it either way. Let me see if I can get back here. I'm sorry, my stuff got all screwed up here. Let me get back here to stop sharing.
While you're figuring that out, I'm going to thank you for sharing your wonderful work. You got a lot of love in the chat that you can look back at when you take a breather here. But I think you're right. This was such a great example of how artists are creating civic hubs. I loved hearing about how the consistency of people knowing where to go and showing up and being in community and creating this artwork together, and how your practice is kind of creating that nexus. So thank you for all of you for giving us that deep dive into what your practices look like. I'm going to invite you all to show your beautiful faces again so we can have a conversation. And just a reminder to our audience, appreciate y'all have been so interactive in the chat and with reactions, so keep it coming. This is an hour and a half, so we're going to go into a conversation with our panelists, and then we will invite the audience in for some questions if you have them. And I would love it if you would use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. You might have to click more, which is 3 dots, and then there's a little, is there Q&A? Or maybe I don't see it. Maybe it's not here today. Oh no, it is there. More, and then there's a little like question mark. It says Q&A underneath it. So if you would mind using that, if a question comes up, throw it into that Q&A. If you can't figure that out, that's fine. You can drop it in the chat and I will pull it there. But for now, I'm going to ask a few questions of our panelists just to kind of get the ball rolling. And Carey, I'm going to go to you first, pull you in. So you showed us a lot of different work that you've been doing. And throughout all the different kinds of projects that you have going on, we're seeing that you are, creating these authentic connections to build that civic, that sort of civic health that binds community. Like you're saying, that culture that is essential to democracy. You're doing it through all these different means, through music, games, gatherings, public art. I want to dig in a little bit more into what that connective tissue looks like in your work and the value of creating those connections between people. What are some of the tools that have worked really well for you to build that sense of culture and connection, especially when there might be a lot of division that you're starting with in community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, um, well, first off, I guess I think art lowers defenses, I think, in ways that politics definitely don't. And I think like what I've noticed is like art's unique ability to create that human connection. And I think a healthy civic culture begins with human connection before you get to policy. Um, and I've learned that like people are way more willing to engage in difficult topics when they feel seen, when they feel welcomed, when they feel connected. I think we're taught in our country to avoid certain topics, certain conversations. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion. Don't talk about race. Um, but I would argue that that is why we're in the state we're in today. Is because we don't learn to have these respectful dialogues about tough topics. We're just told to avoid it. And I would also argue that like, avoiding something uncomfortable doesn't make peace. It just makes you hide it, but you still the everyone has internal like dialogue and conversation that they're passed down or things they say to people that they feel closer with and they feel to a neighbor or to a stranger. So I think art has the ability to like remove those defenses and allow people to just creating like softer entry points into these difficult conversations. And that's what led to like things like games and storytelling. And, it's really just throwing things at the wall and seeing what works to create that comfort, create that environment, and help people engage immediately without becoming defensive.
I think I've seen that theme in all the work that you all have shared, the ability to kind of move people into conversations that might be new or might be uncomfortable, and using art as a tool for that. Erin, let's pivot to you. So much of your work is connected to land and place, like very deeply connected. And then we're also seeing, you're working with foodways, your video, you started with the sweet potato, so much connection to land and through your ancestry. But also there's this theme of like building together and like this sort of collective community ownership and almost entrepreneurship. And I see a lot of connection between like land, food, entrepreneurship. How does that all kind of fit together in your work? And why should artists be thinking about that? Why should artists be thinking about land? Why should artists be thinking about who owns what? And then yeah, any connections that you have around like what does that mean for democracy for all of us for this thing we're trying to build?
Thank you so much, Mallory. I was going to say this is a great question, well formed. It actually hits a bit to what you were saying, Carrie. I shared in the chat a genius quote by just beloved James Baldwin, who said, "The purpose of art is to lay bare the questions which have been hidden by the answers." And so, for me, art is a political praxis. And as a maker, right? My base form has been theater since I was a child. I learned theater at Alabama State University. And my medium has been improvisation and clown work. And so for me, Baldwin is speaking to the ways that our work as makers can lay bare these kind of hidden spaces, right, in community, that have been hidden by these larger structural systems, right? So, in a way, when folks think about the South, like they think about some of these large structural systems, they think about racism, you think about food, like food poverty, all of these things. But in actuality, when you look at agricultural trends, the place to actually grow food in a nourishing space is the Southeast, right? It used to be California. And so, when we look at a space of democracy and a space of like Black liberation strategies, which has been the base of practice across this United States, it came directly from, and I'm partial. It came from Alabama, right? The beauty and the pain on both sides. And so I think for me as a maker, like Mallory, you wouldn't have been able to tell me 15, 20 years ago when I was in New York acting off Broadway that I would be back in Alabama, that I would be with my community growing food, right? For me, growing food is as important as writing a play. It's the land of making a world that we desire to live inside of. To me, that's better than any play, right? Because we get to rewrite the script. We get to rewrite a script. We get to think about who are the characters. We get to reconsider who actually receives light, right? We get to think about what we have on, what costumes we wear, who we get to be. We're reforming and reframing who a farmer is, right? To me, when I think about a farmer, I think about Latricia Harmon, who's like a West Side native who's 19 years old and has been farming with us for 6 years, right? I think about Elias, who's now 12 years old, is like deep in the agriculture since he was 6 years old, right? And so I think that the artist space is directly in community. And that's why for us, we call ourselves waymakers. It's really this decentralized concept of producing, right? It's connecting the producer with the organizer. Because for me, either role is not enough. Like we need one another to be directly in community with one another. And for me, Mallory, it's a hope and a joy. Like all of the folks that are striving towards these like large systems, i.e., a Broadway, i.e., the commercial art space, as Carey and Sassa have been doing, as we all have been doing, if we refocus our light and our energy toward community-based work, we will be able to craft a future where we literally exist and we are well. If we don't give our time and effort to that, it will not be, right? We are not at the whim of the systems that people make on us. We are here and present. Um, yeah, the connectivity work to me is there. Thank you for the impetus, Carrie.
Yeah, I want to invite if either of our other speakers want to react, respond.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what came to mind for me is, and I saw one of the questions in the chat. So between that and what Erin had said, like I think sometimes I think we're also trying to break from these traditional means of art. Like I think there's this perspective of how art should be consumed. This kind of like two-way, something on a wall, these structures which oftentimes have very elitist, racist past, that and I think like there's a call for artists, especially more than ever, to just really be more community centered in their approach and figuring out how to like removing themselves from the idea of the traditional means and traditional ways to engage with art and embracing the more, you know, just embracing the new, embracing what's different, and realizing that it's a journey, not a destination. Like let your practice evolve and flow the same way society is shifting and changing, and all these new tools are emerging, whether it be AI, whether it be social media. There's just so much happening right now. And I think the artist's responsibility is to like really break free from those chains that I think the traditional uh, art ecosystem and really embrace local, I think too. That's what that was just kind of came to mind.
Mm.
So I'm just speaking from the heart on that.
I love to offer one more thought from that, Carrie. Thank you. I'll
Mm.
just, one example, and I love that you said that, Carrie, local and kind of divesting from those quote unquote traditional practices. Like even this piece from Faith Ringgold, the United States of Attica. Like Faith Ringgold learned multimedia art in the Black Art School that Amiri Baraka created in Harlem, right? That lasted just for a few years. She was a young person learning mixed media art in a community-based art school, right? It wasn't NYU, it wasn't Yale. Like, do you see what I'm saying? And because of that community work side by side, that art training work, it crafted the ways that she became an artist, i.e., that she would create a piece called the United States of Attica, where she made bare, right, as Baldwin said, the realities that has happened in this country. And so for me, as many folks have been talking about through the years, it's for me, it's never been art for art's sake, right? Art is a political praxis. And in the ways now, to me, in 2026, with everything that's happening, I don't think that we have a luxury to, especially in Alabama, Carrie, to play around. The last thing I'll say is, Montgomery and Selma, like, we're at very important points. We have a lot of light on us right now, right? And sometimes light is cool. Sometimes light can drown you out. It, as Carrie said, it can drown out the local folks, Joanne Bland, that have been doing this work tirelessly for many years and for many generations. And so for me, Montgomery and Selma in particular are two spaces that divested from this country. They refused. Similar to our folk in Haiti. Like these are spaces that refused, right? The kind of political times of the day. And I will say, even now, Carrie, looking at Selma and Montgomery, like there are still spaces, is money coming in? But it's still spaces that need so many things and things are not built up. Not because it can't be, because these are spaces where people refuse. And there's a long-term cost of refusal. And so for us as makers and folks is in particular in the South, I think it's very important for us to one, come together and two, have our art practice mirror our social practice in deeper ways. Um, it's as Sassa was saying, like, spotlighting the genius woman that you were spotlighting. Um, we want to see a future where women are not kind of barred to these spaces for their activism, right? We deserve to live in a better space. And I think we will make the space that we desire to live in. Nobody else is going to make that for us. And no school is going to give us a certification for that.
I love the phrase waymaking, Erin. You just said make again to close it out, and that verb, making a way where there isn't a way, and that tradition pervades so much of what you all are talking about. I want to pull in that Appalachian perspective, Sassa, and talk a bit about how you've been making a way where there isn't a way, and bringing in that tradition, that history in West Virginia, and also the work of Coalfield development, both the project you shared, but also the work you're doing at Coalfield. And you shared a lot about like creating the civic hubs, using your artistic practice to kind of create a place where people can go consistently, see each other, build community, learn something about their history, and then participate in the present and the future. So when we think about these civic hubs, I'm also thinking about, I think the project you shared is hubbed at a market, right? At a community market.
That's
Is
one
that right?
consistent place that people can come and contribute to it. They know they can always work on the next portrait at the monthly market. Yeah.
So that's one of the places. And then also a lot of the work that Coalfield Development is doing does have this emphasis on the economic resilience and kind of building that back in the region. And, that plays out in a lot of different ways. But can you talk a bit about how you're thinking about that in your own practice, the role that arts plays and kind of building that up in West Virginia and in Appalachia?
Yeah, so Carey said a healthy civic culture begins with human connection, and I wrote that down because that is exactly where I'm at with the types of projects that I'm trying to lead here and in the spaces that I want to lead them in. I'm in a West Virginia. If you ask an average West Virginian how they feel about civics in general or politics or however you would frame it, they feel forgotten, like largely forgotten. There's a lot of people here that are struggling financially. There's a lot of people here that have really no time to even think about that kind of stuff. Even if they wanted to, like there's no time. People are overworked and absolutely exhausted a lot. And there is largely like a mistrust and just feeling forgotten by everybody in charge, basically, because West Virginia is a state that's been extracted from heavily, and not really given back to much at all. And that continues with what we're seeing with like data centers and things, talking about using our beautiful mountains that have already been ripped up for coal mines. So um, people feel forgotten here. I think creating spaces where people are welcome to come and not being asked for anything in return necessarily, and they're being given community. Like, let me just walk you through what it would feel, what I want it to feel like, and what I've been told it does feel like to come to the markets at West Edge Factory. It's one thing. It's a monthly market, but there's a lot more going on in West Edge that Coalfield does as well. We have agricultural programs here. We have screen printing factories. We hire all kinds of people with barriers to employment to do uh, revitalization of buildings. So there's a lot more here, even in this building, than what I'm focusing on. So that's another thing we can invite people in to see when they come in. But when they come for the market, it's like, bring your kids. There's a public park right across the street. We partner with the Greater Huntington Parks and Recreation District and usually have some kind of family friendly event going on outdoors right across the street from the factory so they can come and get their energy out and play. They come in, there's live music, sometimes by my own band, Hoot and Holler. I made a community band, and if a kid walks by us and seems interested, we'll give them a tambourine, come and play with us. You go to the back of the facility, and there's a local food hub called the Wild Ramp that is cooking lunch for everybody. That is like local food made what you can watch them cook it, which is a very Appalachian, West Virginian way to show love to your neighbors. So it's not like some random people that just donated us food that we're passing out. It's people who are talking to you and giving you something they just cooked that was grown locally. You can go talk to the artists that are vending and ask them where they're from and have all kinds of connection points with them. You can take your family into the gallery to see art by a local artist who's right there during that time because we're using that to serve as their reception as well, and they can talk to you about their work. Um, and then you can come and learn about West Virginia's labor history and this huge project that we're doing and create with, and anybody that tells me that's not for me, I don't want to do that, or I'm not an artist or whatever, I will chase them down. Like you are the person who I want to do this. And it's because people feel forgotten. So I want them to share. I want them to have a hand in the things that we're doing. And part of what we're going to ask for in the later half of this project is for people to come in and do a photo drive of family history and bring their photos, and we can scan them and print them directly on the polytab. So the sections of the quilt will have family memories embedded into them and coal mining history, but not just that, any kind of Appalachian history that they want to share. People who have not ever been asked, what's your story? Because it matters. Like, we want to hear from you. We want to display you and your family within this. That to me, that's the part that has to happen before you get to the real, like, before you can start talking about like Carey said, the harder discussions, that connection part, making somebody understand that they're necessary and they're, spoiling them a little bit, like giving their kids something fun to do for free, like just welcoming people in and feeding them and talking to them like they matter because they matter I think that's a step, that's a remediation step that has to be taken in West Virginia before we can get to any other point. And I've really made a huge effort. Um, the work I'm doing with Coalfield, I'm approaching this as an artist too, and I'm sharing this as an artist. It's even hosted on my own website. So that's kind of an interesting thing I'm able to do, um, to be able to talk about it a little bit differently. My work with Coalfield is nonprofit. Obviously, we're not promoting anything politically one way or the other, but it's unavoidable to know that West Virginia is an extremely red state. There's like it's hard to get people to wrap their minds around different points of view, I guess. And I don't even want that to come into play with this. This is a remediation effort that is even like first step below that, like to get people to just come and hang out with people. And there is a huge diversity in the people that come to our market. So chances are, if you come, you're going to be talking to somebody who's not like you, but they're your neighbor and they're eating beside you and they're being sweet to your kid. So like you're gonna get to know them. So yeah, I feel like it's not this is not a step that can be skipped, I guess. And creating a space, because we just don't have a lot of that here. We don't have a lot of, I mean, I know that's disappearing kind of everywhere, but I know here locally we don't have a lot of third spaces. And then once people are here and they're interested, it's like, hey, come back and see what we're doing with this revitalization of an old school that we're turning into affordable housing, and come see what we're doing with agriculture. And a lot of people get involved with us on a deeper level because of that entry point of just a welcoming market that is consistent.
That tees us up really nicely into some of the Q&A that we're getting from the audience, because Sassa, you were just sharing about how you and your team are creating these very culturally specific and inviting access points through the market, but also through all of the different artistic inroads that you've created, the quilt making process, the painting process, all of that. And so the question in the chat is what are the best networks or pathways for artists seeking to roll out participatory art activities to help generate dialogue? So similarly, like Sassa, you're talking about, you have to grease the wheel and make people feel invited before you even really get in any deeper. So how else do the rest of you, Carey, Erin, and Sassa, create those inroads to help people have these conversations using your art practice?
Yeah, I think getting people um, to realize the value in it is probably the toughest part. Again, like going back to my comments earlier, I think a lot of participatory practices can struggle because it's often trying to fit the participatory work into a space that is all about objects and or performances or exhibitions in like the traditional kind of setting. So um, I think those spaces can be so fluid and evolving, and it's really just kind of throwing noodles at the wall and seeing what sticks, but realizing that that dialogue and those that happens from those spaces, though, like it's also valuable and all can inform how that space continues to develop. Like I think the one thing I had to learn, especially with the Black Cherry Tree project, was if this is truly a community centered project, I have to let go of my artist desires and I have to let the community shape it. So that community conversations about ideas about the project shape and where the project, how the project develops, how the project moves. Um, and that's being vulnerable. That's making mistakes and being willing to accept those mistakes and realize that this is not just a thing that you were creating. You're basically a portal for this to come into fruition, but it's everyone's piece once it's inside of once it's a part of the community. So yeah, I think the hardest part is again just understanding that participation, finding networks of people that understand participation is valuable cultural work, um, versus audience attendance. And because I think there's there's a tendency for us to just want to attend something as audience members and just watch the performance and just engage. But people realizing this, we all play a part in this. We are all a puzzle piece to this artwork. And as the late Miss Joanne Bland used to say, if your puzzle piece is missing, then you're a part of the problem. So everyone, I think, has to kind of feel that, and then uh, the momentum starts. And I think we lose sight of the momentum when thinking there has to be some elaborate plan, or we have to have all the funding secured in order to move and make progress. But that's not what it's about at all. It's about conversations like this. It's about one little step forward and everyone feeling like they're a part of the momentum that's happening, and each step forward that's happening. So I think it that's where it begins. And then as far as it is how it grows, it really just it comes down to listening and responding.
Another question in the chat is, I think a clarifying question for you, Erin. What does waymaker mean? I think everyone's loving that term and wanting to hear how you define it.
In process, but the base of it is I grew up hearing that Black folk, especially in Alabama, make ways out of no ways. And so in my kind of life in the arts as a producer, I wanted to be really intentional when I moved to the South to be in relation to community and in relation to organizing in the land. And so I started to call myself a waymaker because I wanted to include the liberatory legacy of my grandparents and my family, folks that did not get the opportunity to call themselves an artist, but that were definitely making their life every day in an improvisational practice of living, intentional living. And so for me, waymaking comes out of a Black radical tradition of being able to resource and care for self and be in relation to community at the same time.
Lots of love in the chat and reactions to that. Thank you, Erin. That was the last Q&A I have. So if you have other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A function and in the chat. But we have a moment here for maybe one more question. So I'm actually going to turn it to the panel and see if anyone has a question for your fellow panelists. Anything that you want to dig a little deeper into, or a connection that you made, or maybe just some love to each other. How about we go there? Just like a little round robin of just like what resonated with you from your other speakers.
I would love to start with that because well, I have to pick one. Um, I love what Erin said about the quote that you gave: "A people entrenched in other people's fiction is an endangered people." I feel like in West Virginia, we're in danger of forgetting who we are because of other people's fiction that was immediately laid over our history with labor. Immediately, as soon as it happened, you can go to the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum and see the pamphlets that were put out that were like, "Do not teach this. Um, Teach this instead." So it was such an intentional erasure, such an immediate intentional erasure, that I feel like that's just something that quote, I'll think of that forever. Um, and I love what you were saying, Carey, about having to let go of your artist control tendencies when you're working with the public. And that's something I don't know that I'm pretty open to change within my own work, but it's a different type of change when you invite other people in. It goes in all types of different directions. And I feel like, especially with the work I'm doing now, being open to like sitting down with people that come to paint with us and listening to what they have to say, and then letting my own ideas as the person shaping the thing change and evolve to expand and welcome what they're saying. I mean, that's part of what happened with realizing that we need to ask people for their family photos, is people sharing all these specific things and being like, "Oh, they don't have anybody to share this with. Like, this is just lost. They think this is going to die with them." And that should not happen. So I really appreciate you sharing that as well.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to connect with you all. I mean, I think it's so, this work can be very tough. And I know you all probably have, like me, experienced ups and downs, um, where sometimes you can be in the work and the work can be happening, but it doesn't feel like it's happening maybe at the pace or the speed that you think it should. You might prepare for an event that you think is you have this grandiose vision for how this is going to go, and it doesn't happen like that. There's just so many examples of what could be a letdown, and I'm curious to you all, like, what are some of the ways? What are some of the little things that you may have noticed in your work, and in your communities where you felt like true transformation was actually happening, despite what may appear on the surface?
Thank y'all. Thank you for that. Thank you, Sassa, too. Um, I would say, I've been to West Virginia once, Sassa, but now I got to come back and meet you and sit at the table. I'm so grateful to do that. And maybe I'll bring some of our fam from Montgomery to sit at your table. I love that thought of making together. And if we can make something together, then at that table, the conversation that we're intentionally having with one another um, can support our beloved difference, right? As Bell Hooks says. Thank you for your work deeply as I was doing research as we're on this on this webinar. And thank you, Carey, for your clarity. I feel like anybody doing work in Selma is vital, especially at this time that Joanne, Bland ascended. It's a very important time for Selma and that organization. And it's always great to see folks from within the state, like being present in Selma. Selma is like, to me, I feel like if Selma is well, then the world is well. Um, if Selma has a base, then the world has a base because it has opened up so much space, even if you knew it or not. Um, Mallory, it's a question in the chat. Actually from my partner, Genius One
Go
Beloved,
for
Sean
it.
Cordes. Yeah, what sustains each of you in this work? I will say, and Carrie, you were speaking to this a little bit. Like, I will say, um, being in community actually sustains me in the work. I get energy from the people. But I'll say, in the restorative space, I love the sauna. I love to sweat. I love to farm and put my hands in the dirt. I love to go to hear music. Um, I feel like in the sustaining practice, walking, being in movement space helps me to get out some of my ideas and thoughts. And as Carrie said, like in these times, this can be difficult work. And for me, I don't want us to sacrifice ourselves in the stead of this work, right? We in our bodies, we are important. And so I think that that's one thing that I've learned from the journey of our elders in Alabama in particular, that in our generation, we can consider our bodies and ourselves in different ways. And we can consider, sharing and distributing the work and ensuring that there are young folks side by side us to pick up and take this work. So it's not just one servant-based leader, right? That to me, that system doesn't work. And it's more of a mutual system to have a multi-spread leadership in co-op space in that way. But Carrie and Sassa, like what sustains you in the work?
I think I can answer that by answering Carrie's question too, because what sustains me are the little moments of transformation that I see in people. Because I can be dog tired and really want to go home, and I can see one little thing happen, and I'm just like, oh my God. And I have a couple really concrete examples. One was at our May Day event. So there are some people in this neighborhood. We're actually in most of Huntington is in Cabell County. We're right on the edge. We're in Wayne County, and there's some of the people that live in the community here just come to stuff at West Edge when they see cars here. Like they don't even know what it is. It's just like, oh, something's going on. I can bring my kid to. And I have a suspicion that this one example was that. So there was a guy with a little girl, his daughter, and I think he came to our May Day event not really knowing what it was, but there was like cool music happening. And we immediately handed everybody a red bandana when they came in the door. So we gave him one, gave his daughter one. He was holding on to him. And they sat and listened to the talk that the director of the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum gave about what it meant, about reclaiming redneck, about what those bandanas meant, and about our labor history with unions and things. And I saw him tie it on his daughter's neck. And I swear I felt like he was just like, I don't know what this means. Like, I'm not putting this on. I don't know what this means because everybody was wearing them. And it wasn't until after that talk that he put it on and tied it on his daughter's neck. And I was like, that's fantastic. And another example is just a really personal one. I'm trans and I don't hide that. I'm pretty open about it, but there's lots of people who don't necessarily know that in the area, maybe when they come and hang out or whatever. So it's not ever present to anybody. And I've had several people at our markets like make comments about that where it was kind of like, I didn't think you and I would get along like because of that. And which I was like, man, that's kind of bold to even like say that to, like to, that's really cool actually to be like, I've never, basically it's like I've never met anybody else that was trans before. I'd never talked to anybody else. It's like you're pretty cool kind of thing. And that is the most bare minimum, obviously, that I could ever want from anybody. But in this area, in the work I'm doing, it's really meaningful, and I know how much it means. And for somebody to even to make the step and the effort to say that means a lot, and it's really important, and it feels like a moment of transformation for someone. So seeing those little things like gives me another little boost to keep going when I'm really, really tired, I guess.
It's beautiful. Um, Carey, can you take us out in about a minute and then I'll close?
Well, I think everyone said kind of like I think what can be said. The thing that was coming to my mind that I struggle with so hard is saying no and realizing it's okay to say no, and um not in terms of like letting go, but saying no, and I think leaning on your community. Because a lot of where I find myself at now is really realizing, hey, I have a full plate. There's a lot going on, and I know what I am good at, and I know my lane. And if someone comes to me to ask for help on something, I don't just have to say yes to it because there's somebody else in my network. There's Sassa, there's Erin, there's Mallory, there's connecting people that kind of way and saying and being okay with saying no and taking the rest you need because I think if you just keep going, it's like a hamster wheel and eventually you will burn out and you got to prioritize that self-care as Erin was saying. So um yeah, I'm just appreciative of this panel. I mean, there's so much to think about and I look forward to staying connected with you all.
I love that you led us here to the end. Thank you, Carey. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Sassa, so much for all of your presence, your work, being here, but also everything that you are doing in your communities. But yes, Carey, the self-care is also the us care, which is why we are doing Creative Power Civic Purposes. We want to connect you all, you speakers connected, the audience connected to you, all of this. So this is the point. So we can have the conversations, but also keep these connections. Our next event is coming up on June 25th. It is on trust, neighboring, and the cultural work of democracy. We already started talking about that here. We're going to continue that conversation. We got Ash Hansen, who will be joining us, as well as Holly Dahl and a few other folks that we are lining up. So we hope to see you all there. If you signed up for the all six, you're already registered, but please join us. And please give our panelists a little extra love in the chat and through the reactions. We really appreciate everything that you've shared today. Thank you, audience, for being here. Appreciate you all.